lot of times I'm asked questions about conflict. And that question can be either from the executive who is needing to have a difficult performance conversation, or it can be from an employee who's struggling with a coworker. And so I like to define conflict a couple of different ways, because once we start thinking about conflict differently, we handle it differently. So one of the ways that I talk about conflict is simply opposing forces. In other words, there's an arrow going to the left and an arrow going to the right. And so when we don't open up and question each other about what's going on, and when we don't seek to understand first, we create even more conflict. So one of the biggest things that I see is people avoiding difficult conversations. And we have a lot of reasons for that. In fact, I hear everything from, well, today it's the company picnic, or, well, they've got seniority and I don't want to rock the boat. They're getting ready for their anniversary, or they're going through a difficult divorce. And before long, the conversation that you avoid today when it comes to leadership becomes a lawsuit 10 years later. So conflict can be a good thing, but what we have to realize is that we have to first become curious instead of becoming certain. We make all kinds of assumptions, and that creates what I call drama. So one of my tips for addressing conflict is to simply see it as opposing forces instead of making it personal about the other person. And another tip is to simply become curious about where the other person, what they're thinking, what their stance is. And I often say, stay in the boat, stay in the boat. In other words, don't jump overboard. Don't get so excited that you start blaming and making up a story about what their intention is. Just take that deep breath, create a space between stimulus and response, get curious, and find that common ground, and before long, you'll be heading in the right direction. I'm asked a lot, why is it important to address conflict? And one of the things that I say a lot is the conversation avoided today can become the lawsuit 10 years later. Now, I'm talking about that on a corporate level, but let me share something in the realm of conflict that will help everybody no matter what their level. What I've found is that there's 4 main reasons for what I call relationship drama, and all conflict involves relationships. So the first reason for relationship conflict is that we're unwilling or unable to speak our highest truth. We avoid a conversation, or we try to appease someone. The second reason is that we don't set the appropriate boundaries, so people don't know the expectations. The third reason is that we think that we are 100% responsible for someone else's success, well-being, or happiness. And the fourth reason is that we think that they are responsible for our success, well-being, or happiness. The way that you know if you're in one of those four reasons for conflict is just by listening to the way that people talk about conflict. They say things like, well, if it wasn't for my employees, I would have a great workplace. Or if it wasn't for my boss, if it wasn't for the way this or that person behaved. But the reality is we're all responsible for our own interpretations and for the energy we bring to the world. So once you start to understand that conflict is really, at the root of it, it's about relationships. And once you understand that you are 100% responsible for what you bring to the relationship, if you clean that up, then you can resolve conflict very easily. So here's what's exciting about conflict. Conflict teaches you where you need to grow. So if there's anyone in your life where you're having conflict, that person's in your life, look at that person as your teacher. They will teach you whether you need to become more curious, more patient, whether you need to set a better boundary, whether you need to learn how to speak your truth. So conflict is really an opportunity for personal growth. I challenge you, if there's a person in your life that you're blaming, if there's a conflict that you haven't been addressing, take that deep breath, get clear on your outcome, and approach that person from a place of understanding, and realize that conflict can help you to grow both personally and professionally.